Welcome to White Women Wake Up, the podcast where we, two women from different generations, come together for real, unfiltered conversations about awaking to our own cultural biases. I'm Jonelle.
I'm Karen.
And we are here to explore how we as white women can learn from one another, unlearn harmful patterns, and create new ways of being in this world without shame, just growth. So Karen, how was your week? How are you doing after last week?
I'm doing good. It's been interesting. I've been replaying that story all week that you talked about last week, and I think about, different times that I've been well-meaning, and I think my well-meaning came from a place that I didn't want to feel bad about myself, and so I jumped in way too quick, I just jumped in way too quick. So anyways.
Yeah. And for listeners, for context, last week we talked about some controversy I saw on TikTok just about how a very well-meaning white woman basically was trying to protect her son downtown, and she didn't really recognize the history of racism around it. And so it's a great episode. Please go back and listen to that. But I think you're totally right. I think that's why we say the word well-meaning, because it always does come from a genuine place. It's not a place of malice. It's truly, I genuinely believe most people are kind people and mean good things for the world. Unfortunately, especially as white women, we don't often realize how much our well-meaning is harmful. And so, I think we're going to go a little bit more into that today. I'm sorry I cut you off last week with my topic. It just was something interesting and fun to talk about. I didn't really realize it would spar so much conversation between us.
Well, I think it was really good because I think it was a real world application of us being part of the world, but us not doing the full work. And so I think one of the things that we're trying to be as white women, and we're going to talk about this today, at least when I bring up my subject, is, I have so much to do on this journey, so much to do, and so much to learn. And if we don't have these conversations, we're not going to learn them. So anyways, we want to keep with vocabulary. So we want to start there so that we keep growing. So Jonelle, you have a word today.
Yep, I brought a word today. So microaggressions is my word. And I don't know if you've heard of it. I think this is probably a word people have heard definitely by now, I would assume. And if you haven't, we can talk about it. But it's definitely something that gets thrown out there a lot. And so kind of wanted to clarify what microaggressions are if you're not aware. So microaggressions are subtle and, again, usually unintentional, well-meaning comments or actions that dismiss and invalidate someone's identity, particularly when it comes to race, gender, or other marginalized groups. So a great example of this is when speaking to a BIPOC person and saying, wow, you speak so well for someone with your background. Essentially, it suggests that they're from a community that we don't expect to be articulate. Or, even microaggressions are saying, oh, wow, your hair is gorgeous. Can I touch it? It tokenizes someone, and it doesn't put them in a perspective as a peer. It puts them more on display. And so
I have a good story about microaggression, and boy, I'm a little embarrassed, but I guess we're going to be authentic and we're going to be real.
No shame.
But I think microaggression comes from, the inherent place that it comes from is our own personal biases. So I had a colleague who's multiracial, and in my bias, and this is so embarrassing, and I'm just telling the public, but in my bias, I assumed this person identified more with Black people than with white people. Or the fact that I even assumed that they had to identify with one over the other is still probably something I need to unpack. Yet I did. And so in our conversation, I kept using language towards their Black parent and their Black community. And big mistake. That was a microaggression. That was an assumed space that I assumed something of that person. And so my comments were probably not coming from a place of unbias. And maybe that's it. It's like microaggressions come from a place of bias. And I don't know, maybe an expert out there will say that's not really a microaggression. But afterwards, I could totally feel the conversation was a little uncomfortable.
No, I think that's a great example because, again, microaggressions are usually very unintended. Like an aggression is something that's intended, like someone is intentionally being racist or intentionally being sexist. But a microaggression is, again, well-meaning, unintentional, but just comes from subconscious bias, things that you're not even aware of your bias. So I think thank you for sharing. I think that is a great and authentic story. I no shame. That did remind me I have a challenge. So remind me at the end. I have a little fun challenge for us that kind of goes on this topic of no judgment and just listening.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Remind me at the end.
I do have several examples.
So, but to wrap
examples of microaggression.
Well,
but
we have plenty of time to talk about them.
Talk about it. Okay.
But just recircling back. So essentially, microaggressions, everyday occurrences that can be harmful, and they're harmful because they reinforce stereotypes, they perpetuate inequality, and they really create an environment where marginalized individuals don't feel seen and they often feel devalued. So again, even if comments aren't meant to be hurtful, it can really contribute to emotional and psychological harm in the long term. So
that word of not being seen, I think like, me, my personality, it tends to be pretty fast. And I think what I've noticed in my own personality is if I'm not really stop to listen to someone else's story, I put a story on them.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to hear each other's stories.
That is a great saying. I totally agree. I think it's really often we put our own stories on other people. And so, again, we don't want to chastise or criticize every move that we're making. I really hope this is not coming across as that, but it's more just opening up to the authenticity of it's okay to maybe make a mistake and then reflect on it later and then think, okay, what could I have done differently? This is not about canceling you if you found out that you're the microaggressor of your office. It's about saying, hey, I didn't realize I was doing this, and let me reflect on it. You are still a great person. You're still well-meaning. You just might have created harm. But guess what? We've all, as white women, not a single one of us has not created harm in some way. So now we're trying to break our cycles of harm. That's what we're trying to do.
Be intentional. Okay, then the other thing we want to do is,
New topic.
I've got a new one for Jonelle. Well, a couple things. First of all, I want to really recommend a book. I want to recommend Everybody is a Feminist by Bell Hooks. One of the reasons I like this book in particular is she really is addressing kind of, I would say, a Black person's concern with white feminism. And I have to say, this is a really new topic to me. And so Jonelle knows this story. I may have shared this story in the beginning, but one of the reasons I was totally motivated to do this podcast is I got to go to a Taylor Swift concert. And at this Taylor Swift concert, there were thousands of women, just feeling empowered with who they were and their songs.
70,000 to be exact.
Yeah, it was awesome. And then the election happened, and I don't know if these 70,000 people voted for, well, I shouldn't say that, but I was really shocked at how the majority of white women did not vote for Kamala Harris, and yet the majority of Black women did. And so I was shocked by that disparity. And this is my ignorance, and I'm going to just really lay it out there. And I think Bell Hooks claims it is that, I, as a white woman, co-opted feminism. And I co-opted feminism in that I propagated my own desires to probably get ahead in my career. I was probably an early feminist because I've always worked. I've always gone to work. I've wanted to succeed in my career. And it never occurred to me that I just saw it as a female issue. And yet, because of my whiteness, I did center it on a white female issue. And so what I love about Bell Hooks is this book, Everybody's a Feminist, she really gives some framework to help us to understand why. And one of the things that in distilling this in this book, why white women actually kind of pushed away Black women is because, first of all, we come from a community that is individualized. And so how do I get ahead? How do I do better? White women don't always come from a community-centered space. This is unpacking a lot of other issues. But also, the media played a big role in this. And so the media was able to distill in sound bites about women getting ahead in their career, women leaving the household. This is all in the 70s and the 80s. And they weren't able to talk about it from a race perspective. Not that they weren't, they just didn't. And so it became kind of a non-race issue and just a female issue. Unfortunately, in my whiteness, in our white world, which is a majority culture, we then dominated the feminist perspective. And so I have to say, I was just shocked that, not shocked. I'm growing. I'm going to grow. I'm going to really work on this because I didn't see it from this space.
I love this so much for you. This actually takes away from one of my topics that I was going to bring up, and it was in the future. And it was something that we had discussed before, and your view was so drastically different. And so for audience members, if you guys haven't noticed yet, I'm a little bit of a pusher. I definitely like to push conversations. I definitely like to be, and not in a negative way, I just have very strong beliefs about justice. And anyway, so in the past, I have made a comment on a couple occasions that white women have set back feminism. And that is definitely a sentence that has really upset family members of mine, you included.
Yeah.
And so I love this, really just shows how education can shift your perspective. So this was the book that you read, Everyone's a Feminist. And the one that I read is called Hood Feminism.
It's called Feminism for Everybody.
Oh, sorry, you're right.
Make sure the word right.
Thank you. Because I also read a book called Everyone's a Feminist, which I don't remember the author right now, but we'll add it to our website. But remind me again. So it's everyone.
This is Feminism is for Everybody. Bell Hook.
Okay. Feminism is for everyone. Well, I read the book called Hood Feminism. And I read this book years ago, which is enlightened me, which made me start saying the sentence that white women set back feminism. And it's Hood Feminism is Notes from Women That a Movement Forgot. And it's by Mickey Kendall. And this book is so brilliant because it's different. It's different works from different women of color talking essentially about how like feminism did become a white focused thing and it did leave people of color behind. And I think what's so interesting how they present in the book is it's kind of like the idea of trickle down economics, which we all know we've seen in late stage capitalism doesn't necessarily work. And so the same thing that happened with the feminism movement in the 60s and 70s was the idea was, let's tackle the easy issues at first. Like, let's tackle the kind of like widespread, easier stuff. And then the thought was, once we tackled that, we could get down to the harder issues, the more marginalized people. And so marginalized is also queer and trans women. It's not just people of color, but it's people of color, queer, trans women, just not marginalized, so like not heterosexual cis white women. And so essentially what they found is the minute the white women kind of checked off the boxes that were convenient for them in feminism, we abandoned feminism, unfortunately. We left people of color, we left trans women, we left queer women behind, and we said, well, great, our needs are met. And again, I don't think any of this was intentional.
Yeah.
Like I'm not trying to shame any of us. I'm really hoping that's coming across. But it's what happened, and I think it's natural.
They go, as I did some more research, this even started in the suffragette movement, because in the suffragette movement, when women were trying to get the vote, there was an argument between women and white women and black women,
Yes,
because they didn't want to derail the vote, the female vote, to race. And
yes.
so I think what is kind of humbling, maybe a little embarrassing, all of the above, is that the more that we're going to dive into this, the more that we're going to see that there was a lot of people putting different perspectives on us that we didn't even know we bought into. And so I'm going to be the first to admit that I bought into feminism, and at the same time, probably I harmed. Or I was a roadblock, to Black person's feminism,
to like holistic feminism.
Holistic feminism.
Yeah.
And I love this book. It's not a complicated book. Bell Hooks is a major figure. And I'm just going to try to read some more stuff.
No, I love that. And yes. No, I love that. We'll get to your next topic.
So, Jonelle, my topic today, I found on LinkedIn. It was a opinion piece by Abram Kendi, and he was responding to a comment he saw, or an article he saw in Washington Post, about Walmart reconsidering their vendors, or the people that they purchased, they sourced to, I suppose that is, their suppliers. And the positioning was that they no longer wanted to respond to the propaganda of race and sexism.
Ooh, you're going to have to unpack that more about what propaganda.
Well, this is exactly what Abram Kendi was saying, is that Walmart, in saying that we no longer want to respond to the propaganda, quote unquote, around race and sexism, is that we're going to be just neutral. We're no longer going to favor female or BIPOC vendors.
Wow, that is a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
Who is claiming this as propaganda? You're saying Walmart is, but who told them?
I'm sure it has to do. That's a great question. That part I didn't see. So I'm sure it has to do with customer feedback, or perhaps looking at customer demographic. The challenge that I actually really appreciated that Abram Kendi brought up is that when we do that, when we try to neutralize it, like Walmart is now trying to say, we actually are being racist and sexist, because our demographic, who are making those decisions, are not. We don't have a neutral decision-making board. And so what I mean by that, let me explain that, is, so then it made me go down the rabbit hole of what are the demographics of Walmart. And Walmart, and this is nothing against Walmart. I use Walmart. I go to Walmart all the time. But Walmart does, they have a really diverse demographic, but their leadership isn't as diverse. So their demographic store-wide is like 50% diverse, but their leadership, so these are the people that are making decisions on who their suppliers would be, who would buy what kind of products are out there. That leadership is 63% white and male. And in fact, it's only 11% Black and African American. And so when we're looking at, so what Kendi, I think, was saying is that even though Walmart is trying to say we're not going to respond to what the world out there is calling propaganda of race and sexism, we are going to neutralize it. The truth is, the neutralizing isn't neutral because we don't have a neutral leadership board making these decisions. So,
Well, and
for it.
it sounds like, I mean, it goes even further than that. My mind is kind of blown with this topic. There's so many things I want to unpack here. First of all, for audience members, I have worked in retail and fashion my whole life. And so I've been a buyer, I've worked in strategy, I've done, online stores, I've been in large luxury department stores, I've done private labels. So I've seen it all kind of thing. And so what's really surprising is this was kind of a big trend for a lot of retailers a couple years ago during the pandemic. George Floyd, again, retailers became woke to racism and really tried to focus more on BIPOC brands. And so I think
inclusive policies.
inclusive policies, totally. But really take like an actual effort to say, hey, wow, just making an effort is the point, calling it out. And so I think what's so interesting here is, one, for Walmart to backtrack on it, but two, for people to call it propaganda is beyond fascinating. And I think it goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier about white feminism and this centering of white feminism. This sounds a little bit to me almost like that, saying of, oh, I don't see color, which I'm sure a lot of you have said. I believe I've even said at one point in my past, which is a very harmful statement. And I understand where it comes from. It comes from us, again, well-meaning. I feel like I've said that word a lot lately, but well-meaning white women who don't want to be uncomfortable by differences and want to say, hey, everyone's included. We're all good. But what we've found is by not identifying differences, by actually not focusing on differences in a positive way. Now that's the difference. You got to focus on the differences in a positive way. You can't make change until we identify and focus those differences. I think one of the best examples to me, and this kind of is what this reminds me of, is people's, feeling that like Black Lives Matter, the saying was propaganda versus, and then All Lives Matter came out. And one of the best analogies I ever heard was Black Lives Matter is like if your house is burning down, but your neighbor is trying to tell the fire truck to also spray their house just in case. And the reality is the fire is not at their house. The fire is at your house. And that's what Black Lives Matter is. The fire was at their house. And we need to focus on that and get that fire out. And it doesn't mean that not all people don't matter. It just means that's the focus. And so I think that's really interesting that they're taking the focus away. And I totally agree. I mean, obviously, Ibram Kendi's amazing, so I'm always going to agree with him. But he's right. This is actually racist. I know they're saying we're doing this to not be racist, but in fact, it's more racist.
Yeah. What I think is so interesting about this is language again. So we talked about media earlier. We talked about the media not understanding what bell hooks had to say. Using language like propaganda is really dangerous. So it then doesn't allow us to have the conversations that we need to be having. We need to be having conversations about feminism. We need to be having conversations about race. We're never going to be able to investigate or interrogate our biases unless we have the conversation.
We need it about sexuality too.
Exactly. And so this notion that just because there's been a conversation around race and sex in a big way, and maybe in a big public way after George Floyd, doesn't mean it's propaganda. It means it's a conversation that needs to be heard. So we're going to keep talking.
I love it. That was a great topic. Like every topic, we could go for hours. So again, please give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to keep talking, but it's been a great episode. Thanks for bringing it up.
Jonelle, thanks for listening to that story. Yeah, it just is a lot of room for thought, isn't it? So you had mentioned in the beginning of this episode that you have a little takeaway for us or something to work on for this week.
Oh, I totally forgot of this. So this is a little trend going around TikTok, but we're going to kind of flip it around a little bit for our tough conversations. And the trend is called "We Listen and We Don't Judge." And so it's kind of a silly thing where people are confessing some embarrassing things to their parent or their partner and, saying silly things like just, silly things that they might be embarrassed to say. But I think we should take it, and I'm going to have us do this next time at the beginning, and share some things that we might be embarrassed or shameful to admit around thoughts around, our biases, like things. I was really impressed by your story and your microaggressions. That's a big thing to share, that you recognize that. And so that's what made me think of "We listen and we don't judge." And so
Hey, we'll try
I encourage all of you this week to maybe have one or two listens and you don't judge with someone you're close with. And then we're going to try it at the beginning of next week's podcast. And we're going to bring some things and we will listen and we will not judge.
Yeah, because I think part of this is training us to have some hard conversations.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on White Women Wake Up. We hope today's conversation sparked some reflection and inspired you to engage with the world in new and more thoughtful ways. Remember, this journey is about learning, unlearning, and showing up with authenticity. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and connect with us on social media. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and keep waking up.
Keep waking up. Bye, everyone.